The recent hearing at the United States Supreme Court concerning transgender athletes has once again exposed how deeply divided American society has become on issues that sit at the intersection of law, identity, and fairness. What might have once been considered a narrow dispute about school athletics has now grown into a national confrontation involving constitutional interpretation, political power, and public trust in institutions. Former President Donald Trump's sharp criticism of Supreme Court justices following the hearing added fuel to an already intense debate, signaling that this issue is no longer confined to courtrooms but has fully entered the realm of political warfare. At the center of the controversy are state laws that restrict transgender girls from participating in female sports categories at public schools and colleges. These laws, passed by several conservative-led states, are justified by their supporters as necessary protections for fairness and opportunity in women's athletics. Opponents argue that such laws unfairly exclude a small and vulnerable group, placing stigma and barriers in front of young people who simply wish to take part in school activities. The Supreme Court is now tasked with determining whether these state-level policies conflict with federal protections, particularly those rooted in Title IX. Trump's response to the hearing was immediate and forceful. He publicly suggested that justices who appear sympathetic to transgender athletes should lose a lot of credibility, framing the issue as one of common sense and fairness rather than legal nuance. His remarks were not subtle, nor were they accidental. They reflect a broader political strategy in which cultural issues are used to mobilize supporters, challenge institutional authority, and draw clear lines between ideological camps. To understand why this moment matters, it is essential to look beyond the headlines and examine the deeper forces at play. This is not simply a debate about sports rules. It is a conflict over how society defines sex and gender in law, how much authority states should have in shaping social policy, and how independent the judiciary can remain under intense political pressure. The Supreme Court cases in question arise from laws in states such as Idaho and West Virginia, where legislators moved to bar transgender girls from competing in female sports categories. Supporters of these laws argue that physical differences rooted in biology give transgender girls unfair advantages, undermining the purpose of separate athletic categories for women. From this perspective, the issue is framed as one of protecting decades of progress in women's sports, including scholarships, records, and opportunities that were hard-won under Title IX. Opponents challenge this reasoning on both legal and human grounds. They argue that the laws impose blanket bans without considering individual circumstances and that they rely on assumptions rather than evidence. More importantly, they claim that excluding transgender students from sports consistent with their gender identity amounts to unequal treatment under the law. For them, the question is not about winning competitions, but about dignity, inclusion, and equal access to educational experiences. During oral arguments, the justices wrestled with how Title IX should be interpreted in a modern context. Passed in 1972, the law was designed to prevent discrimination based on sex in education programs receiving federal funding. At the time, lawmakers likely did not anticipate debates about gender identity, yet the Supreme Court has repeatedly been asked to apply older laws to new social realities, and this case is no exception. Some justices appeared concerned about the implications of allowing states to define eligibility based strictly on biological criteria. Others questioned whether federal law was ever intended to require schools to allow participation based on gender identity rather than physical classification. The tension in the courtroom reflected a broader uncertainty about how far courts should go in redefining legal terms that have long been treated as fixed. It was against this backdrop that Trump's comments landed with such force. By directly attacking the credibility of Supreme Court justices, he crossed a line that many legal scholars consider dangerous. The American system is built on the principle that courts operate independently from political pressure, especially from executive figures. While criticism of court decisions is nothing new, preemptively undermining the legitimacy of judges based on how they might rule raises serious concerns. From Trump's perspective, however, this approach is consistent with his political style. He has long positioned himself as a defender of what he calls common sense values against what he portrays as elite institutions out of touch with ordinary citizens. By framing the transgender athlete issue in simple terms, he appeals to voters who feel uncomfortable with rapid social change and skeptical of judicial interpretation that appears to override local preferences. This strategy is effective because it taps into genuine public unease. Polls consistently show that while many Americans support equal treatment for transgender individuals in principle, they express uncertainty when it comes to sports. The idea of fairness in competition resonates deeply, particularly in a country where sports play a significant cultural role. Trump's rhetoric simplifies a complex legal issue into a moral one, making it easier to mobilize emotional support. Yet this simplification comes at a cost. The Supreme Court's role is not to validate popular sentiment, but to interpret the law. When political leaders suggest that judges should be discredited for unpopular rulings, they weaken public confidence in the judiciary as a neutral arbiter. Over time, this erosion of trust can have consequences far beyond a single case. The transgender athlete debate also highlights the difficulty of balancing competing rights. On one hand, there is a legitimate concern about preserving equal opportunities for women in sports. On the other, there is the equally legitimate concern of ensuring that transgender students are not singled out and excluded. The law offers no easy answers because it must reconcile values that sometimes pull in opposite directions. What makes this moment particularly significant is that the Supreme Court's decision is likely to set a national standard. A ruling that upholds state bans would give lawmakers broad authority to regulate participation based on biological criteria. Such a decision could influence policies in other areas of education and public life. Conversely, a ruling that strikes down these laws would signal that federal protections extend to gender identity in athletics, limiting the ability of states to impose restrictions. Either outcome will have political consequences. Supporters of Trump and other conservative leaders are likely to celebrate a decision that favors state authority, viewing it as a rejection of what they see as judicial overreach. Advocates for transgender rights would view the opposite outcome as a critical step toward broader recognition and inclusion. In both cases, the Supreme Court will be drawn deeper into the cultural battles of the era. The media coverage surrounding the case further amplifies these divisions. Outlets aligned with different political perspectives present starkly different narratives, framing the same facts in ways that reinforce existing beliefs. Trump's comments, widely reported and debated, became a focal point not just because of what he said, but because of what they represent. The ongoing struggle over who gets to define fairness, authority, and truth in American society. It is also worth noting that the individuals most affected by this debate are often absent from the loudest conversations. The students involved are typically young people navigating adolescence, school life, and identity under intense public scrutiny. Their experiences are easily overshadowed by legal arguments and political messaging. This disconnect raises questions about whether policy debates adequately account for human impact. As the Supreme Court deliberates, the pressure from all sides will only increase. Activists, politicians, and interest groups are acutely aware that this decision could shape the legal landscape for years to come. Trump's intervention ensures that the ruling, whatever it may be, will be interpreted through a political lens, making it harder for the court to appear above the fray. In the end, this episode reveals more than a disagreement about sports policy. It exposes a society struggling to reconcile evolving understandings of identity with long-standing legal frameworks. It shows how political figures can influence public perception of the judiciary, for better or worse, and it underscores the fragile balance between democratic debate and institutional independence. The Supreme Court now faces a defining challenge. Its decision will not satisfy everyone, nor should it aim to. What matters most is whether the court can articulate a clear legal rationale that respects both the text of the law and the realities of contemporary life. In doing so, it will test not only the limits of Title IX, but also the resilience of public trust in a system designed to rise above politics, even when politics refuses to stay out of the courtroom.